Imagine a world you know collapsing in the blink of an eye. After my father's death, I was thrown into a world of loneliness and despair. We sold our house and shop to pay off debts, and our peaceful and happy world turned into an endless nightmare. But when everything seemed dark and hopeless, fate started a new game with an unexpected phone call. My mother and I were forced to rent a small house. For me, freshly returned from military service, facing this situation was very difficult, but I had no choice but to adapt. Therefore, I started working at a mechanic shop to pay the rent and other expenses with the salary I earned. In those bitter days, there were neither friends nor family around. It was as if we didn't exist on this earth. Those who once considered themselves friends didn't even bother to check on us, let alone offer financial help. Relatives who used to invite themselves to our house on various pretexts now turned their faces away upon seeing us. But as God never abandons his followers in the hardest of times, he always graced my mother and me with his kindness, and gradually our situation improved. With great perseverance, I managed to buy a mechanic shop and escape that dire situation. I spent my days working in the shop, and in the evenings, I would chat with my mother, reminiscing about the happy days we had with my father. My mother said that my father had hoped for me to continue my education and enter university. But after getting my diploma and not being accepted into university, I promptly went to do my military service. My father had many plans for after my service. However, the pressure of work and the failing market led to his demise. I told my mother that bringing up these topics wasn't pleasant and she shouldn't upset herself by remembering these things. She wiped her tears and apologized if she had upset me. "By the way, son, do you remember Mr. Smith? The man who initially worked for your father and then had to return to his town because of his wife's illness. He called today. He got our new number from our old house." "What did he want?" I asked. My mother explained that Mr. Smith burst into tears upon hearing about my father's death and was very upset. After calming down, he mentioned he had some business with my father but didn't elaborate due to the circumstances. "Do you have Mr. Smith's phone number?" I asked. My father always spoke highly of Mr. Smith. "Maybe he's in need of money or something. It would be good to help him." My mother nodded in agreement and gave me Mr. Smith's phone number. Despite it being late, I couldn't resist and called Mr. Smith. After a lengthy catch-up, I asked about the business he had with my father. He was evasive at first, and despite my insistence, he was reluctant to speak. I had to swear on my father's soul to get him to talk. He broke down in tears, explaining that his daughter had been accepted into a university in Istanbul and he had promised to fund her education if she got in. But he was in a tough spot financially, with creditors on his heels. I thought to myself, he must have been planning to ask my father for a loan to cover his daughter's expenses for a few months until his financial situation improved, and then he would pay it back. But with my father's passing, he was left in a bind. Seeing Mr. Smith's desperate situation and knowing how well he had served my father, I consulted with my mother and invited Mr. Smith and his daughter to Istanbul to find a solution to their problem. That night, I wrestled with my decision, feeling a bit regretful. Our life hadn't yet taken a stable shape, and we were facing many challenges. I feared not being able to shoulder these additional problems. I wanted to scream and ask God why he took my father from me and left me alone with all these troubles. Why, instead of thinking about starting my own life, I had to work from dawn to dusk just to stand on my own feet. But my pride wouldn't allow it. I didn't realize when I fell asleep, but when I woke up in the morning, I didn't feel well and had a terrible headache. I splashed some water on my face and left the house without breakfast. Our house wasn't far from the terminal, so I chose to walk. After about 20 minutes, I reached the terminal and, after asking around, found the place Mr. Smith had mentioned. But there was no one there. It seemed I was late. Just as I was about to leave, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mr. Smith, looking much older and more worn than his years. After exchanging greetings, I asked about his daughter. Mr. Smith said she was waiting outside but wanted to discuss something important with me first. Surprised by his tone, I nodded to show I was ready to listen. Mr. Smith then said, "David, don't judge me by my appearance. I am more broken inside than I look. The pressure of life, failure in business, and on top of that, the death of my wife, turned me into a loser. And now, I'm on the verge of being imprisoned for debt. I've been evading the creditors until now. If I didn't trust you and your mother, I would never have entrusted my most precious belonging, the memory of my wife, to you." As Mr. Smith spoke these words, tears streamed down his face. Unable to hold back his emotions, he stepped away into the yard to hide his tears. After 5 minutes, he returned with his daughter and introduced us. Her name was Sophia. She had black eyes, an average height, wore simple clothes, and had a certain dignity about her face, though she seemed a bit shy. We headed towards my house without much conversation, each lost in our thoughts, pondering the fate that awaited us. The taxi driver's announcement of our arrival disrupted our thoughts. Mr. Smith promptly paid the fare. Once home, I opened the door and after introducing Sophia to my mother, we settled in with some tea and cake. We started sharing memories of the past, sometimes laughing at a memory, other times becoming sad. After lunch, Mr. Smith and I handled his daughter's university registration. Once he was assured everything was in order, he turned to me and said, "David, my work in this city is done, I have to go back. I entrust God and my daughter to you." Just as my father had trusted him, he now trusted me. He asked me to say goodbye to my mother on his behalf. Despite my attempts to stop him, Mr. Smith left, leaving me with a heavy responsibility. From the next day, I worked harder, striving for the happiness and well-being of Sophia and my mother. Sophia's arrival had freed my mother from loneliness, providing her with companionship. My mother was no longer depressed and had found a new spirit. Sophia helped my mother with household chores. Occasionally, I received letters from Mr. Smith, and I wrote back about Sophia's situation. Then, suddenly, his letters stopped coming, and my letters to him were returned. Later, through one of his friends, I learned that he had been imprisoned. I didn't tell this to his daughter. Whenever she asked about her father, I reassured her that he was fine, working in a distant city, and sending money for her education. Sophia was happy about this. Days passed, and Sophia successfully completed her university semesters one after another. She was mostly busy studying, and we didn't see each other much, but I had grown quite sensitive towards her and kept a watchful eye on her activities. Her behavior became very important to me, and every time she thanked me for something I did, my entire being felt warm. Her smile was always on my mind. I didn't want to believe it, but I had fallen in love with her. I didn't know when or how, but I knew she had infiltrated my soul. I desperately wanted to know how Sophia felt about me, but I lacked the courage to express it, deceiving myself with the thought that she might be thinking of me too. One day, while at work, my mother called, asking me to come home early and buy some fruits and sweets. When I asked why, she said she'd explain later. In the evening, I arrived home with the fruits and sweets, curious about the reason. My mother revealed that one of our neighbors wanted to come over to propose to Sophia for their son. Before she could finish, I loudly protested, "Has Sophia finished her studies? She's still young, and her father isn't here." My mother, suspecting my behavior, calmly explained, "They don't intend to marry her off today, they just want to see if the two are a good match for each other." Realizing I had overreacted, I nodded in agreement when the suitors left. Later, I spoke with Sophia and asked her opinion. When she said it was too soon and she still had studies to complete, I breathed a sigh of relief and felt at ease. Subsequent suitors were also turned down by Sophia for various reasons. Eventually, Sophia completed her studies and earned her degree in civil engineering. Sophia's father, due to illness, was released from prison and hospitalized. He had developed severe asthma and his prognosis was grim. He requested that Sophia and I visit him, but he passed away before he could see his daughter. However, in a letter, he had asked me to do everything possible to make Sophia happy and not to spare any effort in ensuring her well-being. Sophia wept as she read her father's letter, and I was lost in my thoughts. A few months passed since Mr. Smith's death, and life gradually returned to normal. One day, my mother mentioned that Sophia, tired of staying at home, intended to start working at a company. If you're interested in seeing how I navigate these breathtaking challenges and reach the peaks of success, make sure to like this video and share your thoughts with me. Write in the comments what you would do in such situations. Your suggestions and opinions could guide me in this ongoing adventure. Now, let's see how the story unfolds. Initially, I opposed the idea, but then I realized that working might help Sophia cope with her father's death. So, I agreed to let her work, though I wish I hadn't. After Sophia started working at the company, her behavior changed. She became colder towards my mother and me. Whenever I asked why, she blamed it on work fatigue. I couldn't bear this situation and decided to speak with Sophia about the feelings I had hidden for years. One morning, when my mother was out shopping, I asked Sophia to wait so I could talk to her. She agreed. At first, I didn't know where to start. Stammering with a trembling voice, I said it was hard for me to make a request. The truth is. I started, but she cut me off, asking, "What request?" I lowered my head and said, "I want to ask you to marry me." Sophia, seemingly taken aback, paused, swallowed, and then said, "David, we are not suited for each other. Our relationship is like that of a brother and sister, nothing more. We also lack understanding. You work in mechanics, dealing with used oil, and I'm into computers. You have a diploma, I have a degree. It's reasonable for me to object. I should marry someone at my level. To be honest, I've already made arrangements with one of the engineers at my workplace." I couldn't hear anything else. The room was spinning, my breath short, my head heavy. I wished I could cry. I didn't notice when Sophia left. I was exhausted and went to my room to lie down, but sleep eluded me. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I felt suffocated. Lost, not knowing where to go, I longed to talk to someone, to lay my head on their shoulder and weep. I had wandered far from home and decided to go to the shop, but I knew my heart wouldn't be in the work. I sat idly the entire day, not realizing when night fell and it was time to go home. On the way, I kept imagining facing Sophia and felt an overwhelming weakness. Finally, I reached home. My mother greeted me and asked about Sophia, but I feigned ignorance. She inquired if I had argued with Sophia. I shook my head in denial. My mother then revealed that Sophia had called her, expressing her desire to live independently and no longer with us. Despite my mother's persistence, Sophia had evaded explaining why. I felt compelled to confess. I admitted to my mother that Sophia was upset with me because I had overstepped my bounds by proposing marriage to her, unaware of the vast difference in our worlds. My mother, visibly upset, went to her room without saying a word. After Sophia's departure, we faced difficult days, and the monotony of life returned. A few weeks later, we received a package from the postman. Sophia had sent us a cake and sweets, announcing her marriage to one of her colleagues. She thanked my mother and me for our efforts and promised to make up for the expenses we had incurred on her behalf. My mother cried, and I tried to console her. After that incident, we heard nothing more from Sophia. Even the company she used to work at was shut down. Years later, I married one of the neighborhood girls and finally moved on from my thoughts of Sophia. One day, as I was flipping through the newspaper, a shocking piece of news caught my eye. The headline read, "Woman and husband commit major fraud, pre-selling numerous residential units with false promises." The swindler was none other than Sophia, and the judge's verdict was long-term imprisonment for the culprits. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more thrilling and intense tales, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to stay updated on my new episodes. In this channel, every story is full of suspense, excitement, and challenges exactly like what happens in real life. We experience adventures that we'll never forget. I look forward to seeing you in future videos. Until next time, stay excited and energetic.